Hello, MCU fans. Today we're going to look at the question, when does Eternals take place in the MCU timeline? And also, is there any chance that Eternals connects with Wakanda Forever? Now, I don't normally like to go into any spoilers in movies when I talk about them in the videos, but there's no way to have this discussion without going over the final scenes of Eternals. So if you haven't seen Eternals, I guess hold off on watching this video. But otherwise, stay tuned because we're going to talk about when Eternals takes place and whether it connects to Wakanda Forever. So let's start with what I would call the assumed placement for Eternals, meaning, when you first watched the movie, when it seemed like it would have taken place, and also, even to this day, what seems the most logical placement for it. So let's look at the clues. The first would be the layered clothing people are wearing. That would kind of place it in either a fall or maybe a spring time frame, or I guess a warmer winter, but certainly gives us some indication of a range for the movie. Then at the end of the movie, in the epilogue, after Sprite turns human, she goes to school. Well, you couldn't go to school unless it was during school season, so a fall to winter to spring time frame. Then a pretty big clue is when they go to visit Fastos, we see the leaves on the ground, which now we're moving towards a fall time frame, and we see the pumpkin on the bench. It's a little hard to make out the pumpkin even in the movie because they don't really come close to it, but it sure looks carved. And so that would make it either a late October or maybe early November if the pumpkin was still sitting out, after Halloween. So we're getting real close now. And then the biggest hint is Ajax's statement when she says it was 5 years ago that Thanos snapped away half the universe. So that is, of course, referring to Infinity War, and that took place in 2018. So that means the movie is going to be sometime in 2023. And then we now know we know from the other clues, October to November. And then, of course, the whole movie relies on the fact that Endgame brought back half the universe. So we know this movie takes place after Endgame. Endgame is in October of 2023, so that pretty safely places Eternals in November of 2023. So, wrap this baby in a bow, ship it, we're done. Or so it seemed, right? Until Disney Plus came along and placed it in a bizarre location. Let's take a look. So, in Disney Plus, Eternals was placed after Shang-Chi and before Multiverse of Madness, and then you throw in the fact that in regions that can show Spider-Man Far From Home, and this is from Japan's region, both Shang-Chi and Eternals are after Far From Home. This is surprising. This was not where anyone would have thought it would be placed. Because let's look at the dates associated pretty typically with these shows and movies. Falcon and the Winter Soldier, we know, happened 6 months after Endgame, so we're talking April, and then it was a couple months long show, so April to June of 2024. We know that Far From Home took place over the time frame of June to July of 2024, which was Peter's summer break. This moves Shang-Chi to July of 2024, which is also a controversial placement. I did a separate video on that where I do go over how at least there's a way to make July of 2024 work, but it's just not where people would have thought it landed. So you can watch that video if you're interested. That leaves Eternals then somewhere in the range of July to November of 2024 because Multiverse of Madness is November of 2024. So somewhere between July and November. Now, the placement of No Way Home is what will help us really get a good idea of where Disney Plus at least thinks this movie occurs. I am going to guess at this point that we're going to see it show up before Eternals because I think they want to keep pushing Eternals back as far as they can. Now, we know that No Way Home took place from July to November of 2024, and in fact, technically July to December of 2024 because of the epilogue where we see Spider-Man swinging over New York and the giant Christmas tree. Now, that looks weird at first because Multiverse of Madness we know is in November, but keep in mind, a movie can happen during the runtime of another movie. And so in this case, Multiverse of Madness is happening, just before the very end of No Way Home. So with that in mind, and that's why I bring this up, is I think Eternals takes place in October of 2024 based on Disney Plus's placement. So technically it's happening during No Way Home. It would certainly explain why Doctor Strange is unaware of the emergence of Tiamat. He had some pretty big things going on. But it does raise the question, why would Disney Plus be pushing this movie later and later, basically a year later than most people assumed it occurred? The biggest problem with this is obviously Ajax's statement doesn't make sense. When she said 5 years ago Thanos snapped away half the universe, well, now it's well over 6. So as stated, at least, it doesn't make sense. Now, maybe what she meant to say is, for a period of 5 years, half the universe was snapped away by Thanos. That's still a true statement, but it's certainly not what she said. So why would Disney Plus seem to be going against the obvious clues in the movie? Well, I've always believed that ultimately Marvel, who I believe helps place these, I don't honestly think it's an intern working for Disney Plus, as some people have jokingly said. I think Marvel is well aware of people's feedback on this timeline, and they continue to keep it the way it is. So I think that Marvel looks at the bigger narrative flow of their story, and that's the most important driver. So why, narratively then speaking, should Eternals be so late? Well, one thing is for certain. The farther in the timeline it is, the more explanation there is for why no one's brought it up yet. That's why it didn't come up in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, or in Far From Home, or in Shang-Chi, or even in No Way Home. So I'm guessing that's a big reason that Marvel keeps pushing it back. But maybe there's another reason. Maybe Eternals will actually impact Wakanda Forever. And we don't know when Wakanda Forever is going to be placed yet until the movie comes out. But let's look at a couple of things we know. We know in Endgame there was a fairly tense discussion between Black Widow and Okoye about some undersea earthquakes. And when Black Widow asked, what are we going to do about them, Okoye basically said, we're not going to do anything. That's what we're going to do. So she seemed pretty miffed about the discussion. So a lot of people began to guess, I wonder if this is Namor, because Namor and Wakanda don't get along in the comics, so probably don't get along in the MCU. Well, let me throw out that the end of Eternals, with the emergence of Tiamat, that is going to create some massive undersea earthquakes. That's going to create earthquakes everywhere. Now, I'm not meaning to imply that I think the earthquakes in Endgame were caused by Tiamat, because, of course, the emergence was halted when Thanos snapped everybody away. What I am throwing out, though, is if the earthquake from Endgame got Namor mad, then wow, the emergence would really get Namor mad, would definitely lead him to decide to leave his kingdom, his undersea kingdom, and come out and go into the land world, and particularly Wakanda, because they're so close to Wakanda, to figure out what is going on. I don't know whether this theory will be true, but it sure would be nice if somebody would mention what's happening in Eternals, even if they don't directly discuss the source of it, because they probably don't know, but just mentioning massive undersea earthquakes. So we'll see. I have no idea if this will tie, but it would be interesting, and it'd just be nice for somebody to bring it up. So leave your comments down below. Tell me what you think. Will these movies tie together, or will anyone ever reference the end of Eternals, or was it really a what-if story? When do you think Eternals happened? Do you think it was the November timeframe? Do you think it was the November of 2023 timeframe, or do you think it was October, November of 2024? Why do you think Disney Plus keeps pushing it back? I'd love to know your thoughts on all these different questions. In the meantime, you can like this video, subscribe to the channel, watch more videos, and continue to enjoy the ever-growing, ever-expanding Marvel Cinematic Universe.